They laughed the second she unzipped the case. The crimson rifle inside blazed under the desert sun, too bright, too bold, nothing but a target for scorn. Veterans scoffed, dismissing it as a parade piece, a toy unfit for war. Mockery rippled down the line until she dropped prone, steady as stone, and squeezed the trigger at 6,100 meters. The cracks split the air, the metallic ping answered, and laughter died mid-breath. Smirks collapsed into silence, eyes wide, jaws hanging open. One shot redefined a soldier's reach, carried by her steady eyes and breath. Who was she, and what vow hid beneath the crimson paint? This is VeteranBiker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. 700 meters. Shooter 1, ready. The line quieted. Smirks lingered, but the noise thinned into uneasy silence. Claire Jensen lay prone, the crimson rifle stretched before her, the desert heat wavering above its barrel. She closed her eyes once, exhaled, and dropped into rhythm. 5 shallow breaths, 1 deep inhale, half release. Her finger tightened, the rifle cracked like thunder. Half a second later, a metallic ping rolled back from the distant plate, dead center. The crowd froze, laughter caught mid-breath, mouths left hanging open. Binoculars jerked upward in frantic disbelief, confirming what their ears already knew. The impossible, the ridiculous, had just landed true. The spotter's voice carried across the valley, sharp with shock, impact, sent a mass. Silence crushed the range. Even the desert wind seemed to hold itself still. Claire cycled the bolt smoothly, movements calm, detached. She flipped open her waterproof notebook and scribbled notes. Numbers flowing across the page like coded prayers. Around her, no one spoke. The mockery that had drowned her entrance now lay strangled in the dust. That was only the first. Minutes earlier they had laughed. The jeers began the moment Claire cracked open the black case. Hinges squealed, the lid swung wide, and sunlight struck red steel. The rifle inside didn't merely gleam, it burned. Crimson paint flared in the desert light like a fresh wound, too bright, too bold, a defiance against khaki uniforms and dust-stained barrels. What the hell is that? A parade piece? Looks like a toy store knockoff. Guess she came to win a fashion show. Mockery rolled down the line like gunfire. Veterans with scarred hands shook their heads. Young privates elbowed each other, grinning. Even spotters, men trained for silence, let smirks slip behind their scopes. Claire ignored them. She lifted the crimson rifle with deliberate calm, hands steady as though carved from stone. The bolt slid into place, the bipod locked, a round chambered. Around her, the laughter swelled. To them, this wasn't a weapon. It was a joke painted loud. Victor Kane cut through the noise. His voice carried weight born of firefights in Fallujah and patrols in Afghan valleys. "This ain't a car show, Lieutenant. War doesn't come in bright colors." The crowd roared with him, laughter cresting like a wave. Claire didn't look up. She touched the pendant at her neck, a shard of crimson glass, and let it fall back against her chest. Then she lowered herself to the dirt. The range officer barked, "Shooter 1, 700 meters, ready." The jeers fell quiet. Smirks remained, but their certainty was about to shatter. At 1,000 meters, the whispers returned. "Beginner's luck. No way she pulls that twice. Wind'll eat her alive." Claire dropped prone again, unshaken. Flags twitched in the morning gusts. Sand drifted low across the valley. She fell into rhythm, squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The plate rang. Impact. Center. Silence deepened. The smirks faltered, replaced by uneasy glances. Victor Kane stepped to the line next. He dropped prone, sighted, and fired. His round struck dead center. Applause rippled, thin but present. He let his words ride the echo. "That's how it's done in combat." The younger shooters nodded, but their eyes slid back to the crimson rifle. Claire returned to her bench without reaction. She flipped open her notebook, pencil darting, not simple range tables, but sprawling formulas: spindrift, air density, pressure drop, Coriolis corrections, numbers layered like language only she could speak. Victor narrowed his eyes. He had never seen calculations like that. Not in schoolhouses, not in combat manuals. At 1800 meters, the range began to claim victims. Heat shimmer blurred the plates into ghosts. Gusts curled dust into devils. Rounds clipped edges, skipped low, or vanished wide. Competitors cursed, spotters shook their heads. Sweat slicked brows, not from heat, but from nerves. Claire lowered herself again, her breathing rhythm cut through chaos. Shallow, 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 deep half-release. The rifle barked. The ping answered. Impact. Center mass. Gasps scattered across the bleachers. 3 for 3. Victor fired after, his round clipping near center. Respectable, but no longer dominant. He felt it in the eyes of the crowd, shifting away from him. He intercepted her as she passed. "Where'd you learn to shoot?" Claire didn't pause. Here and there, the indifference stung worse than insult. 2,900 meters. By now no one dared laugh. The jeers were dead. Even whispers had thinned. The air felt charged, as though the desert itself expected something. The official's voice carried, "Shooter 1, Jensen!" Claire moved to the line. She set her notebook on the dirt, pencil racing. Air density, pressure fall, drift, equations sprawled in tight rows. She anchored the page with one hand as the other adjusted the rifle. Wind whipped across the range, tearing at flags, pelting skin with sand. Mirage boiled, turning steel into wavering shadows. Shooters muttered about impossibility. Claire locked the bipod, lowered her cheek, slid into rhythm. The rifle thundered, a heartbeat stretched, then the plate rang clean. Impact. Center mass! The spotter's voice cracked with awe. Gasps spread. Men who had sneered hours earlier sat frozen, jaws loose, eyes wide. On the bleachers, a retired captain leaned forward, gripping the railing until his knuckles whitened. "That's Solaris breathing," he whispered. "Shouldn't even be public." Victor's head snapped toward him. "Solaris!" The word bit deep. He searched memory, manuals, rumor. Nothing. No trace. He pulled out his phone, thumbs flying, but the system gave nothing back. No Claire Jensen, no Solaris, no record. And yet, he had seen it with his own eyes. Claire sat cross-legged, notebook open, rifle glowing red beneath the noon sun. She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge. She was executing doctrine no one else knew. Victor clenched his fists. He had mocked her once. Now he feared her. By the time the scoreboard updated, disbelief had become fact. Claire Jensen, 4 flawless hits. Victor Kane, strong but not perfect. The rest, scattered misses, clipped edges, excuses. The whispers carried new weight now. Who is she? Not just a lieutenant. Why are the generals watching her? Claire gave no answer. She closed her notebook, packed the crimson rifle and sat still, calm eyes, measured breath. The crimson rifle had spoken louder than any laugh, and silence ruled Iron Creek. The silence didn't last long. Once the officials called the next stage, the noise rose again, but it wasn't laughter anymore. Now it was nervous chatter, sharp whispers that never strayed far from the crimson rifle. Claire Jensen had gone from being the joke of Iron Creek to its center of gravity, and every competitor felt the shift. 3 hits in a row. No way, she's running numbers no one else sees. Could be rigged. Victor Kane heard them all. The words burned. Hours ago, he had been the man they quoted, the veteran the younger shooters crowded near. Now his name was just one among many, a side note under the shadow of a lieutenant. No, a ghost with a red rifle. Next distance, 1,800 meters, the range officer barked. Claire rose from her bench, rifle cradled easily in her arms, notebook pressed flat against her side. She didn't look left or right. Every step carried the same quiet rhythm, the same refusal to acknowledge the weight of dozens of stairs. The line braced against rising wind. Mirage danced harder across the plates, turning targets into rippling smears of heat. Dust lifted in sheets, scraping against skin. Claire dropped prone, locked her bipod, and touched the pendant at her neck. A small movement, almost hidden, but Victor caught it. A ritual? A memory? He clenched his jaw, forcing his eyes back to his own weapon. The crowd leaned in, some standing on benches to get a better view. Claire's chest rose shallow, then deeper, then stilled. The shot cracked. The metallic ping carried back, clean, undeniable. Center hit. The bleachers erupted, gasps, curses, cries of disbelief. The whispers that had once mocked her now twisted into awe. Even the spotter couldn't keep the edge out of his voice. 4 for 4. Victor's palms sweated despite the dry wind. He stepped to the line, dropped prone, and forced stillness into his breathing. His round struck near the bull, close enough to keep him alive in the competition. Applause followed, but it was thin, distracted. They were already waiting for her next turn. By 2,900 meters, the range had transformed completely. Early that morning, the air had been thick with bravado, stories of firefights, duels, deployments. Now it was thick with something else. Anticipation, the sense of history about to be written. Reporters whispered into microphones. Veterans leaned forward with arms folded. Even the range officers watched more closely than procedure demanded. Claire approached the line again. The crimson rifle gleamed beneath the noon sun, its finish chipped in places but no less defiant. She lowered herself, notebook open at her side, pencil darting. Victor stole a glance at the pages. Not charts, not the usual ballistic tables, lines of equations scrawled like a foreign language. His chest tightened. No one he knew, no sniper, no instructor, ever wrote numbers like that. Wind tore across the valley. Dust devils spun and collapsed. Mirage boiled over the targets, making them shimmer like water. Several shooters cursed quietly, already doubting. Claire pressed the bipod deeper into the gravel, shifted 3 inches, and slid her cheek against the stock. Her breathing began, mechanical, alien, the rhythm that made veterans shift uncomfortably in their seats. Victor found himself whispering despite himself, "What are you?" The rifle thundered. For a moment, nothing, just the storm's howl. Then the plate rang, dead center, echoing like a bell struck by fate. The range froze. Even the spotter paused before calling it. Impact, center mass. Gasps swelled into stunned silence. Men who had sneered hours ago sat slack-jawed, eyes wide, unable to explain what they'd seen. On the bleachers, Captain Reed leaned forward, gripping the railing until his knuckles whitened. "That's Solaris breathing," he said, louder this time. His companion turned, puzzled. It shouldn't even exist outside black programs. Victor's head snapped around. Solaris again. The word clawed at him, heavy with meaning he couldn't grasp. He pulled out his phone under the bench, typing furiously. Nothing. No manuals, no doctrine, no public trace. The system had been scrubbed clean or buried deep. He looked back at Claire. She was already packing the rifle, face calm, movements efficient. The woman everyone thought a parade piece had just bent the laws of probability, and she acted as though it was inevitable. Victor clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. Respect was shifting like sand under his boots, and he couldn't stop it. When the officials called his name, he stepped to the line with more force than necessary. He threw himself prone, locked the bipod, and sighted downrange. Sweat stung his eyes, grit scratched his throat. He exhaled hard, squeezed, and fired. The round clipped close to center, good enough to earn nods. But it wasn't perfect. It wasn't history. Applause came, but muted, respectable, not dominant. As he rose, he saw the truth written in their faces. He was no longer the man to beat. Claire Jensen was. The scoreboard updated again. Claire Jensen, 4 flawless center hits. Victor Kane, close, but not perfect. The rest, scattered misses, clipped edges, outer rings. The whispers thickened. No one laughed anymore. Now they speculated, nervous, eager, afraid. She's not just good. She's different. Never seen technique like that. Maybe she's not really a lieutenant. Colonel Harris moved closer, clipboard tucked under his arm. He lingered near Claire longer than regulation required, his expression unreadable. When he leaned down to speak, his voice was pitched low, but Victor, straining, caught fragments. Steady, Commander. Procedure. General Trent. Victor froze. Commander, not Lieutenant. And Trent, High Command, not range bureaucracy. His suspicions hardened into certainty. This was no ordinary contest. Claire Jensen wasn't here for trophies. She was here to be measured. His chest burned with anger and curiosity in equal measure. Whatever Solaris was, she carried it in her breath, her notebook, her crimson rifle. The storm surged harder, wind rattling canopies, dust slashing bare skin. Officials signaled for the next stage, 2,900 meters. Shooter 1, Jensen. The crowd leaned forward as one. Claire adjusted her sling, touched the pendant once and moved to the line. The desert gave no mercy as Claire lowered herself into position for the 2,900-meter stage. Heat shimmered off the valley floor, turning the far-off target into a ghostly shape wavering in the mirage. Dust devils twisted across the range, rising and collapsing with sudden bursts that left grit in every mouth. Competitors wiped sweat from their brows, tightened grips on water bottles, and checked their rifles again and again, as if preparation could steady nerves that were already unraveling. The 2,900-meter mark was where theory began to collapse into instinct. Manuals could describe the physics, charts could offer corrections, but past 2 kilometers every calculation seemed fragile against wind shear, temperature shifts, and the cruel curve of the earth itself. This was the distance where the difference between a prodigy and a pretender revealed itself without mercy. Claire Jensen's name was called first. As always, she was the one to open each stage. Murmurs accompanied her walk to the firing line, though the tone had changed. No longer were they full of open mockery. Now the whispers carried unease, speculation, a reluctant respect that no one yet wanted to admit aloud. She lowered herself to the ground, stretched flat, and leveled the crimson rifle toward a target that shimmered like a mirage in the haze. Her hands moved with precision, checking the bipod's bite into the earth, adjusting her shoulder until the rifle seemed to fuse with her body. She flipped open her notebook once more, its pages already crowded with dense writing. Her pencil darted in sharp strokes, annotating numbers, circling tiny notations. The crowd leaned forward, some watched through binoculars, others through live-stream screens. The air was thick with expectation. A few competitors stood on tiptoe, craning for a better view, curiosity outweighing rivalry. Wind curled along the line, strong enough to pull canvas awnings taut and sting exposed cheeks with airborne grit. Even seasoned marksmen frowned, muttering curses. Mirage flickered across the range, making the plate shimmer as if submerged underwater. Claire's breathing pattern returned, alien to those around her. Short inhales, shallow but steady, then one deeper pull of air, followed by stillness that seemed to suspend time. Her finger settled lightly on the trigger. The rifle cracked. For half a second, the bullet vanished into heat and dust. Then came the metallic ring, unmistakable even across such distance. "Impact center!" the spotter shouted, his voice breaking through the wind. The stands erupted, not in laughter this time, but in gasps, in startled exclamations that carried both awe and disbelief. The live broadcast cut instantly to her face, capturing the stillness in her eyes, the absence of celebration. Claire didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the uproar. She cycled the bolt, cleared the chamber, and began recording numbers into her notebook. To her, the shot was part of a sequence, nothing more. To everyone else, it was the impossible made visible. Victor Kane felt his pulse thudding in his ears as he stepped forward for his own turn. He had built his reputation on mastery under fire, on landing shots when chaos reigned, but this woman's unbroken streak gnawed at his pride. She had dismantled the hierarchy of the range with nothing more than consistency. He lay prone, lined up the 2,900-meter plate, and exhaled. His shot cracked, and the bullet struck close to Bull. Respectable, enough to keep him in the running, but not enough to reclaim the spotlight. The applause he received was subdued, more an echo of courtesy than admiration. When he rose, he saw heads still turned toward Claire, heard voices still murmuring about her technique. He clenched his jaw. He had been reduced to a footnote in her story, and he despised the thought. Colonel Harris walked along the benches, clipboard tucked under his arm, expression neutral. Yet his eyes lingered on Claire each time he passed. Victor noticed. Others noticed too. Something was out of place. She wasn't being treated like a newcomer. She was being watched like a variable in an experiment. On the bleachers, Captain Reed, retired and half forgotten by most, leaned forward in his chair. His voice was soft, almost lost under the wind. "That's Solaris breathing," he muttered, shaking his head. His companion turned, puzzled. Reed didn't elaborate. He knew enough to understand that some words were not meant to be spoken loudly. Victor caught the phrase, though. Solaris. He rolled it over in his mind. It wasn't in any training manual he'd ever studied, not in the archives he'd scoured between deployments. The word was unfamiliar, yet weighted, as if carrying a history carefully hidden. Claire, meanwhile, remained detached from the speculation. She packed her rifle, closed her notebook, and drank sparingly from a canteen. Her eyes stayed fixed on the valley, watching how the wind dragged banners and twisted dust plumes. She seemed less a competitor than a scientist recording data, every detail absorbed and stored. The scoreboard updated, 3 flawless center hits. Her name stood at the top, untarnished. Beneath it, the others stacked with misses, outer ring strikes, clipped edges. The gulf between them widened with each round. Reporters swarmed the media zone, microphones raised, questions barked. The feed zoomed on the Crimson rifle, its bright surface blazing in the harsh light. Commentators tried to explain it away. Perfect equipment, perhaps, or sheer coincidence stretched impossibly thin, yet even as they spoke, their voices faltered. Coincidence did not hold across 3 successive distances. Victor returned to his bench, wiping grit from his rifle's action. His mind whirled. He had spent years cultivating dominance, years ensuring that no one could challenge his standing as the veteran to beat. Now, before his eyes, an unknown lieutenant was dismantling that reputation without a hint of effort. He leaned toward another shooter, voice low. "I'll find out who she is. Nobody walks in out of nowhere and shoots like that." The other man only shrugged, eyes still fixed on the Crimson rifle. By late morning, the range was buzzing with restless energy. Spectators who had come expecting entertainment now sat on the edge of their seats, sensing they were witnessing something historic. Soldiers in uniform traded glances, the bravado of earlier hours replaced with uneasy respect. Even those who had mocked her felt the shift. The woman they dismissed as decoration had rewritten the day. For Claire, nothing changed. She remained composed, her movements methodical, her focus narrowed to the sequence unfolding before her. She had carried the weight of expectation long before she arrived at Iron Creek. What others called impossible, she called preparation. The crimson rifle rested across her lap, its finish chipped in places where use had worn the paint. To the crowd, it was a spectacle. To her, it was memory, a relic bound by a vow she carried like bone. As she cleaned the chamber and rechecked her notes, the desert wind howled harder. The next distance loomed 4,100 meters. Few had ever even attempted it. Fewer still had landed clean. For many, it was the wall where progress ended. But for Claire Jensen, it was simply the next step. The whispers had grown into a low roar by then. Solaris, unknown lieutenant, crimson rifle, every word tangled with curiosity and unease. And while the range braced for the next impossible test, the weight of silence still hung heavy from her last shot, one that had turned jeers into gasps and carved disbelief into history. By midday, the proving ground had settled into a strange rhythm. Heat pressed down like a weight, but the usual swagger that accompanied these contests was gone. After Claire Jensen's third flawless strike, the atmosphere turned cautious, as though the entire audience was waiting for something none of them fully understood. Targets at 4,100 meters were readied. For most, this was the edge of possibility. The wind at that range was no longer a single current, but a shifting lattice. Gusts colliding from different angles, splitting bullets away from their path. Mirage boiled above the ground, hiding the steel plates in wavering light. Claire's number was called first. As always, she walked to the line under the gaze of hundreds. Cameras tilted, lenses tracked her every step. Even her silence became part of the performance, unsettling in its lack of reaction. She lay prone, unfolded the bipod, and steadied her weapon. This time, though, she wasn't entirely alone. Colonel Harris moved closer, clipboard tucked to his side, his face composed but watchful. His presence near her station was subtle but deliberate, and Victor Kane saw it. He never saw Harris stand so near to any other competitor. Claire flipped open her notebook. The pencil scratched quickly, formulas snaking across margins already dense with figures. She read wind flags, scanned mirage distortions, calculated spin drift, and marked tiny corrections. The crowd saw a woman scribbling numbers. Victor saw something else, a code of discipline that no ordinary lieutenant should possess. The wind surged, lifting a veil of dust. Spectators shielded their eyes. Claire adjusted her scope and slipped into a strange, breathing cadence. The shot cracked, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The target shimmered, then shuddered. Impact, center, the spotter confirmed, voice edged with awe. For a moment, silence pressed heavier than the heat. Then whispers rose like a wave. 4 perfect strikes, at ranges where veterans missed more often than not. On the bleachers, Captain Reed leaned forward again. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the rails. Solaris breathing, he murmured once more, louder this time. "Shouldn't be here, shouldn't even be public." The words carried just far enough for Victor to hear clearly. He turned sharply, eyes narrowing. "Solaris?" Reed didn't answer, only shook his head, gaze fixed on Claire. The old soldier's expression was one of recognition laced with unease, as though watching a ghost step out of memory. Victor pulled out his phone, thumbing the screen with restless urgency. He searched military databases, open reports, competition archives. Nothing. No Claire Jensen listed in sniper schools, no records of deployments, no commendations. The absence itself felt suspicious, like someone had scrubbed her trail clean. He looked back at the crimson rifle, its paint glinting under the merciless sun. She was too precise, too unflinching. Whatever Solaris was, she was part of it. Meanwhile, the rest of the competitors struggled. Gusts tore shots wide, bullets clipped edges or missed entirely. A few hit outer rings, earning nods, but none struck dead center. When Victor's turn came, he poured every ounce of focus into his attempt. His round hit solid, close to Bull, but not perfect. He rose to polite applause, but the difference was clear. The gap between him and Claire had widened. Reporters surged forward, their voices urgent. "Lieutenant Jensen, how are you calculating the wind? What's in your notebook? Who trained you?" Claire ignored them all. She cleaned her chamber, capped her scope, and closed the notebook with deliberate calm. She moved with the quiet assurance of someone following orders no one else could see. Colonel Harris stepped near her as she packed her rifle. His words were pitched low, meant for her alone, but fragments reached Victor's ears. "Steady, Commander," Harris said before catching himself. He cleared his throat. Lieutenant, keep procedure tight." The slip was small, but Victor heard every syllable. His pulse spiked. "Commander, not Lieutenant, and procedure? Orders from above." Claire only nodded faintly, eyes never leaving Harris's face, but the exchange lasted a second too long. The truth was bleeding through cracks in the facade. When Harris moved on, Victor clenched his jaw. His suspicions hardened into certainty. This contest was not just a competition, it was a stage. Claire Jensen was no ordinary participant. She was being tested, measured, watched. The scoreboard confirmed what everyone already knew. Claire's name glowed at the top. 4 perfect strikes out of 4. Beneath her, the rest of the field was scattered, some still respectable, others drifting far behind. Whispers thickened in the stands. Solaris, Commander, Red Rifle. Nothing about her presence fit the story they'd been told. Claire herself remained unchanged. She sat at her bench, expression calm, face unreadable. She adjusted her sling, noted the shifting wind again, and sipped water sparingly. To her, it was just another step forward. To the rest, it was a revelation growing too large to ignore. By the time the call went out for the next distance, the proving ground felt transformed. No longer a contest of equals, it had become a stage for a mystery none could unravel, and while the sun burned mercilessly above, the unease in Victor Kane's chest burned hotter. He would find out who Claire Jensen truly was. He swore it. By the time the sun began its slow descent, Iron Creek proving ground no longer felt like the same place. The early arrogance had burned away with the morning haze. Spectators who had once laughed openly now watched in wary silence, waiting for the Crimson Rifle to speak again. Each stage had stripped away disbelief until only the question remained: how far could Claire Jensen go? The scoreboard glowed with a hierarchy that unsettled many. Her name stood alone at the top, flawless. Beneath, veterans and champions sat stacked with scattered misses. The crowd had stopped doubting. Now they were simply waiting for her to fail, if only to prove she was human. The call went out 5,200 meters. The distance sounded unreal even as the words were spoken. 4 kilometers had already stretched belief. Now the steel plates sat so far away they seemed like mirages on the horizon, barely distinguishable even through high-powered scopes. The weather turned crueler as the stage was set. Clouds gathered along the ridge, dragging cooler air across the valley. Gusts snapped range flags violently, sending tents straining at their lines. A low murmur rippled through the spectators. Few had ever even attempted this distance, and fewer still had managed clean strikes. Claire rose from her bench when her number was called. She carried the rifle as though weightless, her movements unbroken by fatigue. Each step toward the firing line seemed to drag every gaze with it. Victor Kane watched closely, his expression a mask of control but his jaw tight. He had fired at long ranges before, under conditions far worse than this desert storm, but never with such unshakable precision breathing down his neck. He needed to see her miss. Claire lay prone once more, setting the bipod into the gravel. She opened her notebook, pages fluttering in the wind, and anchored them with one hand. The pencil darted quickly, marking wind speeds, angles, density changes. To the crowd it looked like madness, numbers too complex to calculate under pressure. To her, it was language she had spoken for years. The storm pressed harder. Dust lashed the line, stinging exposed skin, hair whipped free from under caps. Several competitors shielded their scopes, muttering about unfair timing, but Claire did not flinch. She adjusted her rifle 3 inches left, shifted her shoulder, and leaned into the weapon until her cheek touched the stock, like a final piece falling into place. Her breathing began again. Short, steady pulls, then one deeper intake, then the pause. The rifle thundered. The crowd held its collective breath. For a long second nothing came, then faint but undeniable, the metallic ping echoed back from a target almost invisible to the naked eye. "Impact! Center mass!" the spotter called, his voice cracking with disbelief. Applause rippled at first, scattered and uncertain, then swelled into cheers. Even the veterans who had scoffed at her could not deny what they had just witnessed. 5 perfect stages, each more impossible than the last. Victor's stomach tightened. He stepped to the line for his own attempt, forcing calm into his limbs. He lay prone, the storm battering him as well, and squeezed the trigger. His round struck out a ring, close but not center, respectable, but compared to her bullseye, it felt hollow. He rose to applause, but he could see it in their eyes. Their respect was drifting, no longer anchored to him. The crimson rifle had stolen it. As competitors cycled through, the difference became undeniable. Misses multiplied, the storm punishing even the best. Yet Claire remained untouched, her precision slicing through chaos as though the elements bent to her will. Near the benches, Colonel Harris intercepted her as she returned from the line. He offered a bottle of water, his tone unusually warm. "Impressive," he said quietly. "Not bad for a first run here." Claire accepted with a nod, her eyes never leaving his face. Harris leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Stay steady, Commander. General Trent expects procedure intact." The slip was quick, corrected instantly, but Victor heard it. "Commander, General Trent," the words hammered in his mind. He pretended to clean his bolt, angling his ear closer. Claire's reply was too soft to catch, but the truth was already exposed. She wasn't here as a lieutenant. This entire contest was something else. Victor clenched the rag in his fist, fighting the churn in his gut. He had mocked her once, dismissed her as a parade piece. Now he realized he was a pawn in something larger. And the worst part was, he still didn't know what Solaris was. The storm grew heavier as the stage closed. Competitors struggled to shield equipment, and crews secured tents against the gusts. The range, once filled with easy laughter, now felt like the edge of a battlefield. Claire sat quietly at her bench, rechecking her rifle with patient hands. Her face remained unreadable, though the shard of red glass at her throat swung gently in the wind, catching the last rays of sunlight. She touched it briefly, grounding herself as she always did, then tucked it away. For the crowd, the story had shifted again. She was no longer an underdog, no longer the woman mocked for carrying a crimson rifle. She was the frontrunner, the phenomenon. And the whispers were no longer derision, but questions. Who was she? Why did the generals watch her so closely? And what vow did the color of that rifle conceal? Victor watched her with narrowed eyes, torn between resentment and reluctant respect. He couldn't deny her skill, but he would not let the truth remain hidden. If this was a test, he wanted to know what game he had been dragged into. The scoreboard updated once more. Claire Jensen, 5 perfect hits, no one else came close. The final stage loomed, 6,100 meters. The distance itself carried myth, a range whispered about but never conquered. Now, after all that had come before, the crowd believed they might actually see it happen. As night shadows gathered along the ridges, Iron Creek waited in a hush that felt like the calm before a storm. Claire Jensen sat with her crimson rifle resting across her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon, unbothered by the weight of hundreds of stairs. And Victor Kane, fists clenched at his sides, promised himself that he would uncover every secret behind her mask. The storm rolled in with a force that no one could ignore. Clouds thickened over the ridgeline, turning the light across Iron Creek into a dull, bruised glow. Flags snapped violently, canvas shelters strained against their poles, and every gust hurled sand like shrapnel across the firing line. It was the kind of weather that shut down most competitions, yet here, at the proving ground, no one left their seats. Everyone knew what was coming next. The final distance. 6,100 meters, a stretch that had never been recorded in official competition, a distance most considered fantasy more than possibility. Yet after 5 perfect rounds, no one doubted Claire Jensen would attempt it. The only question was whether she would succeed. The scoreboard glowed with her name alone at the top, a line of flawless center strikes. Beneath her, the other shooters trailed, respectable in their own right, but nowhere near her record. The whispers that had followed her since morning had grown into a roar of speculation. She was no longer simply the woman with the crimson rifle. She was something else entirely. Colonel Harris raised his clipboard and called the line to order. Final stage, 6,100 meters. This round decides our finalists. Every eye swung to Claire. She rose without haste, slinging the rifle across her shoulder, her notebook tucked beneath one arm, her pendant swung against her collarbone, the shard of red glass catching what little sunlight filtered through the storm. She walked to the line with the calm assurance of someone carrying out a routine rather than stepping into history. Victor Kane's gaze followed her like a predator's. His pride burned hotter than the desert wind. He had already been overshadowed, his own performance reduced to footnotes beneath her streak. But he still clung to one hope, that this distance would expose her as human. Claire lowered herself prone, her movements smooth despite the gusts tearing across the range. She pressed her bipod into the gravel, opened her notebook, and shielded its pages against the wind. Symbols filled the margins, numbers dense and rapid, calculations for spin drift, density altitude, mirage distortion, and more. Her pencil darted with certainty, as though she had rehearsed this very moment countless times. The crowd leaned forward. Even the veterans, hardened by years of combat, held their breath. The atmosphere carried the tension of a battlefield before the first shot. Claire settled her cheek against the stock. Her breathing pattern began, steady and strange, shallow pulls, one deeper inhale, then silence. The rifle barked against the gale, recoil punching into her shoulder. For a long second nothing came. The wind roared, thunder rolled across the valley. Then ping, a clear metallic strike that cut through the storm. Center mass, the spotter called, his voice trembling with disbelief. The proving ground froze. Hundreds of eyes widened. Even the reporters stopped speaking mid-sentence. Claire Jensen had done what no one thought possible. 6,100 meters, dead center. The silence was almost unbearable before it broke into chaos. Cheers erupted, voices shouting over one another, applause hammering against the storm. Soldiers clapped shoulders, reporters cried into microphones, and even skeptics could not find words to explain what they had seen. But not everyone celebrated. Victor Kane surged to his feet, his voice cutting through the noise. "I demand her weapon be inspected," he shouted. Nobody makes that shot clean. Not at that distance. Not in this storm. The crowd faltered. Applause stuttered into uneasy murmurs. All eyes swung to Victor, then back to Claire, who still lay prone, calm as stone. Colonel Harris hesitated, glancing toward the command tent. From its shadow emerged General Marcus Trent, silver-haired, his presence commanding silence without a word. He raised one hand. "Proceed with the inspection," he ordered. Technicians rushed forward, carrying cases of tools. They surrounded Claire, who had already risen to her knees. She handed over the crimson rifle without protest, her expression unreadable. Her eyes remained steady as the experts stripped the weapon apart piece by piece. The crowd leaned closer. Cameras zoomed in. If there was electronics hidden in the stock, if there were illegal modifications buried in the barrel, now would be the time to prove it. But nothing appeared. The rifle was exactly what it seemed, a precision Axe MC, carefully maintained, customized for fit but not for trickery. No hidden circuitry, no prohibited optics, just steel, glass, and paint. One of the technicians turned the weapon so the audience could see. The crimson finish was chipped in places, revealing bare metal beneath. This was not the pristine surface of a parade piece. This was a weapon carried in the field, its scars painted over in defiance rather than vanity. Claire's voice, soft but carrying, broke through the storm. "My sister built it, she painted it red." The words were nearly drowned by thunder, but those close enough to hear understood. The rifle was not a trick. It was a memory, a promise bound in color. Victor's face drained. His accusation had fallen flat, his attempt to reclaim authority backfiring before the eyes of hundreds. The crowd began to murmur again, but this time the tide turned against him. Where once he had been respected, now he stood exposed as desperate. General Trent stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the competitors. "This championship is not yet finished," he declared. "Verification protocol will commence. Movement sequence 6,300 meters." Gasps rippled. Everyone knew the rumors of that test. A moving course, timed, no safe benches, no waiting for calm. A trial designed not for competition but for assessment. Victor's pride steadied him. He clenched his jaw. "I'll go first." Rain hammered the gravel as he took position. Targets blinked alive at staggered ranges. A siren wailed. A timer began. Victor sprinted to the first post. Dropped prone, fired, hit. He rose, ran, fired again. 5 targets fell under his shots, but the last plate, the farthest, escaped him. His bullet clipped the frame, ringing hollow. Still the crowd roared. 5 of 6 under these conditions was no small feat. Victor straightened, chest heaving, pride intact. Then Claire stepped forward. She flowed from post to post like water over stone, her crimson rifle steady despite the rain. Each shot came in rhythm with her breath, the cadence of Solaris carrying her through. Targets fell one after another, each impact ringing sharp through the storm. She reached the final post, 6,300 meters away, the plate barely visible through the rain. She touched the red pendant once, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. Ping, sent a strike. "All targets hit," the spotter called, his voice breaking. The range erupted in disbelief. Reporters shouted. Soldiers stood frozen. Veterans shook their heads. Victor stared at her, water dripping from his cap, his pride unraveling. General Trent stepped closer, his words cutting through the storm. "Assessment complete. Major Jensen, your status is confirmed." The revelation slammed across the range. Major, not lieutenant. The truth hung heavy. She had been here not as a competitor, but as a candidate under scrutiny. Claire rose slowly, her posture shifting. No longer the quiet unknown mocked for a painted rifle. Now her authority radiated without effort, the storm seeming to bow around her. She secured the crimson weapon, face calm, eyes unshaken. Victor's chest tightened. It hadn't been a contest, it had been a test. Every shot, every doubt, every confrontation, part of an evaluation he hadn't even known he was part of. The storm raged harder, lightning flashing across the sky, and as Claire Jensen stood at the center of Iron Creek, crimson rifle in hand, everyone finally understood the silence she had carved with her shots was not luck, not spectacle. It was destiny, and it had only just begun. The storm had not fully cleared when the proving ground fell into stunned silence. General Marcus Trent's words still echoed. Major Jensen. The revelation shifted everything. Spectators who had cheered minutes earlier now whispered in uneasy tones, as though they had stumbled into a theater where the script was suddenly torn apart. Claire Jensen stood steady, crimson rifle balanced in her arms. Her face revealed nothing, yet her posture carried weight. The mask of anonymity was gone. No longer a lieutenant dismissed by veterans, she was now recognized as a major under Trent's command. Every detail of the contest, her early number, the strange breathing, the flawless calculations, slotted into place. Victor Kane felt hollow. He had entered the championship to dominate, to prove again that combat experience outweighed range theatrics. Instead, he had become a spectator in someone else's evaluation, used as a yardstick for something far greater. His accusation had fallen flat, his pride battered. Yet beneath resentment, a sharper feeling gnawed at him, curiosity. Technicians packed away the stripped rifle components, confirming once more its legality. Reporters scrambled to relay the revelation, their commentary wild and conflicting. Some called her a prodigy, others whispered about black projects and clandestine units. Only those who had served in the murkier corners of conflict recognized the truth. Programs existed beyond official rosters, projects trained in silence, deployed without fanfare. Solaris, Reed had murmured. Now it had a face. Before the noise could settle, a runner burst from the command tent, drenched in rain, breath ragged. "Message from Ops!" he shouted, stumbling to a halt before General Trent. Guardian team stranded on the Himalayan frontier. 2 wounded, enemy converging on their position. Immediate fire support required. The murmurs died at once. Soldiers understood what that meant. No more competition, no more demonstration. This was combat. Trent's expression hardened. Casualties? 2 critical. Extraction window 90 seconds at most, the runner confirmed. Claire's composure cracked for the first time. Her fingers tightened around the pendant at her throat. "Who leads the team?" she demanded. The runner hesitated, then answered. "Lieutenant Ethan Jensen, Major. Your brother." The words cut through the storm like a blade. Claire closed her eyes once, the briefest flicker of pain. When she opened them again, the mask of command slid back into place. She straightened, voice firm. "We move now. Within an hour, the contest was forgotten. Equipment was loaded into unmarked transports. Claire and Victor were ushered aboard a tilt-rotor craft, its engines roaring as rain hammered the fuselage. The crowd remained behind, left with rumors and fragments of a story they would never fully know. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was different from the range. No spectators, no applause, only the hum of engines, the weight of gear rattling against the floor, and the knowledge that men's lives depended on what came next. Victor sat across from Claire, his rifle resting across his knees. For once he didn't try to speak. He studied her instead, the calm on her face, the steady grip on the crimson weapon. Maps waited under red lights at the forward command tent of the forward base, hastily set up along the edge of the Himalayas. The cold hit them first, air thin, sharp, biting at exposed skin. Snow crunched beneath boots as they hurried inside. General Trent stood at the center, pointing to satellite images spread across a table. "The Guardian team is pinned along this ridgeline. Enemy patrols here, and at the cave mouth. Distances are 6,450, 4,900, and 4,300 meters respectively. Extraction bird will arrive. You'll have 90 seconds of cover." Claire leaned over the maps, eyes narrowing. 6 at the cave entrance, 2 patrol leaders on the ridge. A voice carried no hesitation, only sharp calculation. We neutralize them. The team can move. Victor exhaled slowly, the numbers twisted in his stomach. These weren't plates on steel poles. These were armed men, capable of firing back, capable of killing. Trent's gaze fixed on Claire. You take the cave. Kane covers the patrol leaders. No arguments. Victor felt the weight of those words. Trust. He had mocked her once, and now she was extending faith to him in turn. He nodded, jaw tight. Technicians handed them portable weather kits, barometers, compact rangefinders. UAVs are jammed. You're on your own for readings, an officer warned. They moved out before dawn. A snowcat carried them partway up the slope, engines growling against ice and stone. Beyond that, it was boots and sleds, every step crunching into the frozen crust, breaths steaming in the bitter air. The climb grew harsher. Ice clung to their gear, wind clawed at exposed skin, and snow lashed sideways in thick sheets. Visibility shrank to mere meters. Yet Claire pressed forward with relentless pace, crimson rifle strapped across her back like a banner of defiance against the white wilderness. Then disaster struck. A deep crack split the silence, echoing across the slope. Snow shifted underfoot, the surface sagging. Avalanche! A guide barked, but it was too late. A slab of ice sheared away, tumbling down the mountainside in a roar that shook the earth. Claire and Victor threw themselves flat as snow cascaded past, a wall of white that threatened to drag them into the abyss. When it settled, the path was gone. Their 90-second extraction window was slipping away with every lost second. Claire scrambled upright, scanning the shattered slope. "We climb," she ordered, voice unyielding. Victor's chest burned as he hauled himself up the jagged face, fingers clawing for holds, boots slipping against ice. Claire moved with uncanny rhythm, each motion efficient, unbroken. They fought their way upward, snow pelting their backs, lungs screaming in the thin air. At last, they reached a rocky outcropping that overlooked the valley. Claire dropped prone instantly, unrolling her cloak to blend against stone. Victor collapsed beside her, dragging his rifle into position. Through their scopes, the battlefield emerged from the storm, 8 figures, faint against the snow. 2 patrol leaders circled higher along the ridge, 6 more clustered at the cave mouth, rifles slung, unaware of the hunters above. Claire's notebook flapped in the wind, pages filled with dense calculations. She anchored them with one gloved hand, pencil flying across margins. Victor read out weather data, his voice hoarse. Wind, 10 to 15 knots northeast, pressure falling, humidity high. Claire adjusted her scope, movement surgical, her breathing slowed into that strange Solaris cadence. Primary 6450. Secondary 49 and 43, she whispered. Victor nodded, forcing his nerves into steel. These weren't just targets. These were the barriers between Ethan Jensen's survival and his death. The radio crackled. Overwatch, standby. 10 seconds. Claire closed her eyes briefly. For a moment, Lena's face returned to her mind. Her sister grinning, rifle slung carelessly, the promise spoken long ago. Don't miss. Not once. Her eyes opened, calm as stone. She chambered the first round. 3, 2, 1. Execute. Victor fired first, his shot cracking through the storm. Both patrol leaders dropped before they could turn. Claire's rifle followed in rhythm, each shot sharp, precise. 6 figures at the cave mouth collapsed one after another, never reaching cover, never firing a return round. The storm howled, but silence fell across the ridge. No movement, no resistance. Targets neutralized, Claire reported, her voice steady. Below, the Guardian team surged from hiding. Wounded men were hauled toward the extraction zone. Rotors thundered as the helicopter swept in, its blades scattering snow in furious spirals. Through her scope, Claire caught sight of the last man boarding, tall, broad-shouldered, blood staining his sleeve. Ethan Jensen. Even at that distance, she felt his gaze. He raised a hand in salute before vanishing into the aircraft. For the first time that day, Claire's lips trembled. She whispered, almost inaudible, "Lena, we did it." Her fingers pressed the red pendant until her knuckles whitened. The mission had ended as fast as it began. Rifles were packed, gear stowed, and the slope descended in silence. Victor followed Claire down, his mind heavy with what he had witnessed. He had doubted, mocked, resisted. Now he carried the weight of respect, though he would not admit it aloud. At the field base, General Trent waited. "Major Jensen, flawless execution," he declared. Then his gaze shifted. "Sergeant Kane, commendable performance. Project Solaris could use men like you. Consider this your invitation." Victor stood frozen, words caught in his throat. Hours ago he had laughed at a crimson rifle. Now he was being offered entry into a world he hadn't known existed. Claire closed her rifle case with a metallic snap. Her hand lingered on the scarlet surface, reverent. The color was no vanity. It was memory, promise, and cost. Victor's voice broke the silence as they prepared to leave. "What does the red really mean?" he asked softly. Claire met his eyes. "It means we don't forget," she said. "Not the promise, not the cost." The storm outside raged on, but her words lingered heavier than thunder. The mountains receded into shadow as the transport cut back across the ridge. Inside the aircraft, the cold still clung to Claire's skin, snow melting into her gloves. She sat opposite Victor Kane, the crimson rifle secured between her boots. Neither spoke for several minutes. The roar of the rotors filled the silence, but beneath it pulsed the weight of what had just happened. She had seen Ethan, alive, wounded, but alive. That single salute from the extraction ramp had anchored her more firmly than any applause at Iron Creek ever could. The image replayed in her mind, sharper than the snow glare. Her brother was safe, at least for now. The cost of that survival, though, lingered heavy. Victor studied her in quiet disbelief. He had fought battles where luck and instinct carried him through, but what he witnessed in the storm was something else. Claire hadn't simply hit impossible distances. She had done it under pressure that would have broken most. He found himself replaying her rhythm of breath, the seamless transitions, the absence of hesitation. It wasn't just skill, it was doctrine, one he had never been taught. When the craft touched down at the field base, General Trent was waiting under the canopy of red lamps. Snow hissed against the fabric, wind rattling the steel supports. He greeted them not as competitors but as assets. "Mission successful," he said. "Major Jensen, your execution was precise. Sergeant Kane, your steadiness under fire confirms your candidacy." Victor blinked. "Candidacy?" Trent's gaze was unwavering. "Project Solaris requires men and women who can operate where normal doctrine collapses. You've had a glimpse of what that means. Consider this your doorway." Victor had no answer. Hours ago he had mocked Claire's rifle. Now the general was inviting him into a program wrapped in secrecy, one that already seemed to bend the laws of possibility. Claire said nothing when the ceremony ended. No speeches, no triumphant gestures. She simply inclined her head once in acknowledgement, then bent to close the rifle case. The lid clamped shut with a metallic snap, sharp and final, like a door sealing away everything that had just happened. In the dim glow of lamps strung across the field tent, the crimson finish caught the light, burning faintly as though the rifle itself held fire inside its steel. Later that night, the mess tent smelled of kerosene and damp wool. Soldiers huddled near heaters, trading whispers over tin mugs, but Claire sat apart in the corner, a solitary figure bent over her notebook. Pages fluttered in the draft with each gust that slipped beneath the canvas walls. She wrote with a deliberate hand, transcribing data from memory. Wind shear, pressure drops, minute corrections carved out of the storm. To anyone else they would be numbers. To her, they were commandments, etched into the page as though permanence could hold back loss. Victor hesitated before approaching. He was a man who had walked through fire, yet tonight his steps felt cautious, measured. He pulled the bench across from her, the legs scraping softly against frozen ground. "You didn't have to trust me up there," he said finally, voice low. Claire didn't look up. "I did." "Why?" The word carried defiance, but beneath it something else, something close to hope. Her pencil stilled. For a moment the only sound was the restless flap of canvas in the wind. Then she raised her eyes. They were calm, steady, but unyielding. "Because I saw you in the storm," she said, "and you didn't break. That's enough." Victor's throat tightened around the reply that rose. Pride battled with humility, but the fight ended in silence. For once he had no retort. He gave a single nod, a soldier's wordless acknowledgement, and stood to leave. Claire lowered her gaze, the pencil scratching once more across the page. That night, the blizzard clawed at the mountain, rattling the canvas, whistling through frozen seams. Claire sat cross-legged in her cot with the crimson rifle across her knees. The storm howled outside, but her world had narrowed to the weapon in her lap. Her fingertips traced the chipped paint, sliding over scars cut deep into the steel. Memory flooded in unbidden, Lena's hands painting the weapon stroke by stroke, her laughter bright against the dim garage light, her promise ringing like a bell, "Red means we don't forget." Claire closed her eyes, clutching the pendant at her neck, the shard of glass warm against her lips. She whispered words too quiet for any ear but the storm's. Morning came grey and bitter. Snow crusted the ridges, the sky hung heavy and low, and the transport groaned as it carried them down from the heights. The Himalayas shrank behind them, swallowed by mist. Officially, none of it had happened. Reports would be filed as aborted due to weather. Broadcasts had already been cut short. Records would be sanitized, stripped of names, purged of proof. For the world, Iron Creek ended with a storm and a cancelled championship. But for Claire and Victor, nothing was the same. At the debriefing, General Trent stood before them, backlit by the pale grey glow filtering through the tent. His words were even, measured, but each carried the weight of command sharpened on secrecy. "The range was your test. The mountain was your initiation. Solaris does not train for trophies. We prepare for the moments when lives balance on the impossible." Claire met his gaze without a flicker, understood. Victor hesitated, his pride twisting in his chest, disbelief and recognition warring inside him. In the end, he gave only a single curt nod. That was enough. Trent dismissed them, leaving the words to hang heavy in the canvas air. As they stepped into the cold again, Victor's eyes fell on the crimson rifle slung across Claire's shoulder. Once he had seen it as a parade piece, a toy begging to be mocked. Now he saw something else entirely, memory, vow, and legacy carved into steel and fire. And though he would never say it aloud, he knew the truth. Nothing in his life would ever feel ordinary again. When they finally returned to Iron Creek, it was as if they were walking through a memory. The proving ground lay deserted. Wind dragged thin streams of sand across the abandoned firing line, tracing over benches half buried, awnings collapsed, flags torn and hanging lifeless. The grandstands were empty. Reporters had long since vanished, their cameras packed away, their stories rewritten into silence. Only the range remained, scarred and waiting. Claire paused, her gaze sweeping over the field where laughter had once echoed, where silence had struck like a hammer, where a crimson rifle had spoken louder than doubt. She closed her eyes for a moment, hearing again the metallic ping, the crowd's sudden hush, the vow whispering back from memory, "Red means we don't forget." Only a handful of soldiers remained, clearing equipment or resetting targets that no one would fire upon again. To them, the range was just another assignment, but to Claire, stepping back onto the gravel, it felt like walking into the echo of another world. The memory of every shot lingered here, each metallic ping woven into silence that still seemed to hum with disbelief. Victor trailed a few steps behind her. His face was pale, drawn, his usual fire subdued into thought. He hadn't said much since the debriefing in the Himalayas. He had followed orders, packed his gear and kept his silence. Yet his eyes never left Claire, and the weight in them carried questions he hadn't yet dared to ask. General Marcus Trent stood waiting at the far end of the range, flanked by Colonel Harris and a pair of aides. The general's uniform was damp from lingering rain, silver hair slicked back, but his posture remained iron. He gestured them forward. "Major Jensen," Trent said, his voice carrying easily across the gravel. "Sergeant Kane, welcome back." Claire inclined her head. Victor snapped to attention. Trent studied them both, his gaze steady. Iron Creek was never about a championship. It was a crucible. The mission at the ridge confirmed what I needed to know. "You've both proven yourselves." Victor's throat tightened. "With respect, sir, I didn't clear all targets." "She did. I'm not sure." Trent cut him off with a raised hand. "Perfection isn't the only measure. You stood in a storm under impossible odds and did not falter. That steadiness matters. Solaris has no use for arrogance, but it requires those who endure." Victor said nothing. His pride stung, but he could not refute the truth. Trent turned to Claire. "Your performance leaves little doubt. You were trained for this, prepared for years. But more than skill, you showed restraint, focus, and command. Solaris recognizes you not as a candidate, but as its cornerstone." The words carried finality. Claire accepted them without outward reaction. Inside, however, a wave of memory broke against her composure. She saw Lena's grin again, her sister holding the rifle fresh painted in crimson. "Red means we don't forget," the vow echoed. She tightened her grip on the pendant around her neck. Trent dismissed them, leaving Harris to finalize paperwork. The colonel handed over sealed folders, orders stamped with red ink, instructions for assignments Claire knew she would follow without hesitation. Victor received his own packet, his name printed under the emblem of Solaris. His hands trembled as he accepted it. When they stepped back out into the open air, the storm had passed. The desert smelled of wet stone, the clouds breaking into streaks of fading light. For the first time in days, the world seemed still. Victor broke the silence. "Why me?" His voice was low, stripped of bravado. "You could have told Trent I wasn't ready. You could have walked away without a word." Claire paused, turning her gaze toward him. "Because you didn't run. You mocked me, you doubted me, but when it mattered, you stood and fired. That's more than most." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I don't understand you. You carry that rifle like it's a shrine. You write equations no one else can read. You breathe like a machine. And now, this." He lifted the folder in his hands. "Solaris, I don't even know what I'm stepping into." Claire's expression softened slightly, though her voice remained calm. "You'll learn. Solaris isn't about glory. It's about the promises we keep, the ones no one else will." They walked in silence for a while, boots crunching against gravel. The range lay empty around them, a graveyard of laughter that had once tried to bury her. That evening, Claire sat alone near the edge of camp, the crimson rifle across her knees. She cleaned it slowly, methodically, each motion a ritual. Victor approached but didn't sit until she gestured faintly for him to join her. He watched her hands work. "You said your sister built it." "She did, and she painted it red." Claire nodded. Lena believed that color meant more than camouflage or vanity. She said red was memory, that if we painted it in blood, we'd never forget what it cost to carry it. Victor frowned. "What happened to her?" Claire paused, the cleaning cloth resting against the steel. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon. She never came back from training. Solaris doesn't forgive mistakes. She told me before the final exercise, don't miss, not once. When she fell, I promised I never would. The words hung between them, heavier than the storm they had survived. Victor lowered his gaze. For the first time he understood. The rifle wasn't a symbol of arrogance. It was a tombstone she carried into every fight, a vow etched in color. The days that followed blurred into preparation. Solaris didn't linger in one place. Orders arrived, movements began. Claire and Victor were folded into a unit few outside command even knew existed. Training intensified, secrecy deepened, and the world beyond shrank into whispers. Yet the memory of Iron Creek lingered. Soldiers who had been present spoke of it in hushed tones, their stories half disbelief, half awe. The Crimson Rifle became legend almost overnight, though no broadcast ever admitted the truth. One evening, Victor found himself on the firing line beside Claire once more, this time without spectators. The desert lay empty, stars pricking the sky above. He watched her settle into position, breathing that familiar Solaris rhythm. "Teach me," he said quietly. Claire glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once and began to explain, not in grand speeches but in the quiet cadence of instruction. How to feel the wind as weight against the cheek, how to listen to the Mirage as language, how to control the body until it became metronome and machine. Victor listened, absorbed, humbled. For the first time he felt the door opening, not into competition, but into something larger, darker, and more necessary. Months later, they would be deployed again. Missions in corners of the world, no map highlighted, engagements where no medals would ever be awarded. Each time Claire carried the Crimson Rifle. Each time Victor followed, steadier than before, and each time, when silence fell after the final shot, he remembered the laughter of Iron Creek, the laughter that died at 6,100 meters. The world would never know what had happened that day. But for those who had seen it, for those who had lived it, the story endured. A woman mocked for her rifle, who turned ridicule into silence with a single pull of the trigger. For Claire Jensen, the Crimson Rifle was never just steel and precision. It was a relic of blood and memory, a reminder forged in pain. Every curve of its frame carried Lena's laughter, cut short too soon. Every scratch in its crimson finish whispered of Ethan's survival, of battles where she had no right to endure but did anyway. And every breath she took through its scope carried Solaris, the rhythm no school dared teach, the doctrine spoken only in storms and silence. To Victor Kane, the rifle was something else entirely. It was the breaking point of his pride. A man who had survived ambushes, firefights, and 3 wars discovered that his arrogance could still be stripped bare in front of a crowd. The woman he had mocked as a pretender forced him to confront the truth that respect is not carved into scars or pinned to a uniform. It is earned at the edge of the impossible, when no excuse can hide failure and no rank can buy victory. And for both of them, that rifle became a vow. Every impossible shot, every gusting wind, every silence carved across valleys, they all carried the same message. The color red was not paint, it was remembrance, it was grief, it was promise. It was the iron weight of never forgetting. The storm at Iron Creek ended with more than the echo of a bullet striking steel. It ended with silence so profound it seemed the desert itself was listening. The laughter that had once mocked her rifle, her stance, her very presence, it had been erased, replaced by something heavier, awe. Claire Jensen had walked onto that range, ridiculed as a parade piece, but she walked off as a soldier who had redrawn the limits of what discipline, patience, and raw will could achieve. For Victor, the transformation was just as brutal. He entered Iron Creek determined to dominate, certain that his record made him untouchable. He left with his pride tempered, reshaped by fire. He had become part of something larger than himself, something that humbled him. In the end, his story wasn't about defeat, it was about revelation. He had learned the rarest lesson of all, that respect cannot be demanded, only witnessed in the moments when chaos presses down and a single heartbeat decides everything. But what lingered most wasn't the applause, the gasps of the crowd, or even the records shattered. What endured was the vow woven into steel. That crimson rifle painted by a sister who never came home wasn't vanity, and it wasn't spectacle. It was a monument, a living reminder that weapons do not only kill, they carry memory, weight, cost. Each pull of Claire's trigger was an invocation of sacrifice, a blending of grief and determination so pure it turned mockery into silence. Iron Creek was meant to be a competition. Targets, scores, trophies, that was the cover story. But no one who stood there that day could leave believing it was only that. It was a crucible, a proving ground, not of skill alone, but of truth. It revealed what textbooks could never capture, that mastery isn't found in numbers or charts, but in patience so sharp it cuts through chaos, in silence so steady it bends storms, in the refusal to bow when the world itself presses down. For some, Iron Creek became a tale of awe. For others it was fear, a reminder that legends are born not in distant myths but in the very real breath of a soldier lying prone on the gravel. And for a select few, it was recognition. The realization that the line between soldier and myth is not fixed. It can be blurred, rewritten, erased entirely by one shot, one breath, one vow painted crimson. As viewers, we take more than spectacle from this. We take a reminder: never underestimate quiet resolve, never dismiss conviction because it doesn't look the part. Claire Jensen proved that determination painted red could silence a field of doubters. And that silence still echoes long after the last shot fades. Now I want to hear from you. What did you take from her story? Was it the discipline, the vow behind the color, or the way a single soldier turned ridicule into respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading them. And if you've been with us through this journey, don't stop here. Subscribe to VeteranBiker for more stories that peel back the layers of courage, sacrifice, and the hidden costs behind the legends. New tales are waiting on the screen right now. Click through and ride with us into the next. Thank you for watching, thank you for supporting, and above all, thank you for remembering that sometimes the loudest sound on a battlefield is the silence that follows a single impossible shot.